On Biden's first day as the 46th President of the United States, he issued an executive order canceling the Keystone XL pipeline, making good on his promise to the climate activists to help get him elected. However, this act would soon have repercussions in the form of high gas prices and our independence from foreign oil-producing nations nullified, a step back to what I call the Stone Age. The ramifications of his stroke of the pen action are causing a financial burden on an already belt-tightening country. But hey, what is more important than to deliver on his promise to an eco-climate group that claims the world is going to end in 2 decades if we don't stop the raping of the environment? This particular warning is led by a Democratic-Socialist, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, possibly one of the stupidest, if not the stupidest congresswoman to be voted into office. Go Chick-fil-A, girl. Between President Joe Biden and the so-called squad, the government's march towards socialism and totalitarianism is well underway, dismantling our energy independence from foreign countries that President Donald Trump had achieved to make our country great again. But it was disposed of by President Joe Biden with the stroke of a pen because President Chicken Little thinks the sky is falling. The sky will fall, but that will be up to God to determine when that will happen. Furthermore, no paid-for-hire scientists are going to convince me otherwise. Neither should you be convinced otherwise, too. The Biden administration is now faced with a lawsuit brought by at least 21 states that argue the country is hurting economically by this decision. But Biden is clueless as to how Americans are suffering, claiming Americans are better off now than a year ago. Really? So if you find yourself feeling the pain at the pump, don't blame former President Donald J. Trump. Blame President Joe Biden and the Democratic Party. The southern border crisis, which to this day is still an ongoing problem for the United States and its people along the southern border. The Biden administration's open borders are allowing the worst of the world's people to cross into the United States to reap the rewards of free money, free healthcare, and free reign to commit crimes and undermine the immigration laws and take advantage of the lax enforcement. And no, I'm not saying that everyone crossing the border illegally is a criminal, although the act itself is. No, the fact is indisputable that coyotes are using some of the illegals to move more and more drugs into our nation. And let's not discount the sex and human trafficking coming across our border. Why have an immigration policy for those who will follow it, live it, and abide by it if the government is not going to enforce it? The term "a country of laws" is a joke when you consider there is no law on the books in the United States on open border policies. Let me be clear. I don't have an issue with immigrants, period. My issue is the thousands of immigrants following the rule of law are being sidestepped by permitting illegal immigrants to cross the border and receive governmental relief. And yet, the millions of American people left homeless and abandoned can't find relief from the very same government that turns a blind eye and giving amnesty to anyone breaking immigration policies. And you tell me how fair that is. No, my friends, it isn't fair at all. In addition, New York has legislated a law to permit the undocumented to vote in their state and local elections.
Well, the squad member's remarks come as her hometown, New York City, is set to allow some 800,000 non-citizens the right to vote in local elections.
Why do you ask? Simple. Plain and simple. It is the most corrupt scheme to get registered, undocumented, and illegal aliens to keep the Democrats in power. And the biggest issue with the legislation championed again by Mayor de Blasio and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the New York State Democrats is to disenfranchise New York citizens. Listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's statement in this video.
We just lived through almost 2 years now of a pandemic that where our country relied on undocumented people to survive. Who else was sanitizing our buildings? Who else was caring for our elders? Who else was harvesting our food? Who else was stocking our shelves except immigrant labor in the United States of America?
She says because they stock our shelves, sanitize our offices, work the fields, and contribute to the wealth of our nation. If you pay slave wages to the undocumented and illegal aliens, the contribution only benefits the business owners that are hiring them, leaving them in poverty or servitude. Modern day slavery, if you ask me, and a means to keep corrupt socialist Democrats in power. Prove me wrong. Thank God for governors like Texas's Abbott and Florida's DeSantis and Senator Cruz, who continue to defy the government's open border policy. And with great determinism, Governor Abbott, who continues to build a wall at our southern borders. By the way, where is our border czar, Vice President Kamala W. Harris? Oh, that's right. She said she won't go until she goes to Europe, which has already been accomplished, yet the likelihood of her visiting the border is 0 to none.
Let me just quickly put a button.
Okay.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
I'm here in Guatemala today. At some point, we are going to the border. We've been to the border. So this whole thing about the border, we've been to the border. We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
The Biden administration's historic withdrawal from Afghanistan has to be the highlight of Joe Biden's presidency. Withdrawing U.S. troops like dogs with their tail between their legs drew much attention from our allies and the American public. Why? Well, to begin, the killing of 13 servicemen and women at the Hamid Karzai International Airport, in which an ISIS-K terrorist set off an explosive device killing U.S. troops in what should have been a highly secured area. But it wasn't because the Biden administration bargained with the Taliban to provide security. Of course not. The Biden administration asked the Taliban to protect U.S. troops while withdrawing. Talk about asking a fox to guard the henhouse. In addition, the Biden administration's withdrawal left, or rather gift-wrapped, $85 billion worth of highly sophisticated weaponry, arms, equipment that made the Taliban the most sophisticatedly equipped terrorist organization in modern history. And of course, the Biden administration would blame former President Donald Trump for this fiasco.
It's time to bring our people back home.
To end America's longest war.
The U.S. will soon complete its withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan.
Alarming images.
Taliban fighters have flooded the capital.
They're American-made weapons in the hands of Taliban fighters.
Many of the Afghans trying to escape actually helped American armed forces.
It was quite clear that it was going to come to this.
I stand squarely behind my decision.
The blame game only backfired because the Pentagon representatives would go on to blame the Biden administration for such a botched military action. And yet, till this day, no one, I mean no one, has been held accountable for this mess, unless we forget the scapegoat arrested, incarcerated for asking for accountability of the events of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Not only did this event make the U.S. appear incompetent in the global theater, but we left U.S. citizens and Afghanistan allies behind as hostages. And they said former President Jimmy Carter held the record for incompetence with the Iranian hostage crisis of 444 days.
They tied me up, put a gun to my head. 52 hostages, 444 days. America's first battle with militant Islam.
The fact is, if he continues to avoid there being Americans in Afghanistan that were left behind, how secure do you think that makes you feel? Is he concerned about the safety of Americans or the potential terrorist attacks on our country? According to Veterans Today website, it was owing to the wicked designs and duplicitous standards of morality practiced in the USA that it lost respect, prestige, and honor and suffered a financial loss of $2.3 trillion without achieving any of its objectives in Afghanistan. $85 billion worth of sophisticated weapons and defense equipment was left behind for use by the Taliban. While 5 top U.S. defense contractors made huge profits and are the winners. Folks, you don't have to guess who the losers are. The citizens of this nation. That's who. In 2003, our strategic objective in Afghanistan were 6. 1. Eliminate Al-Qaeda network in Afghanistan. 2. Convince or compel Afghan Taliban to end its support of Al-Qaeda. 3. Demonstrate that the United States is not at war with the Afghan people or Islam. 4. Demonstrate U.S. resolve in the war on terrorism. 5. Build international support for the war in Afghanistan. 6. Stabilize Afghanistan following the fighting. What have we achieved? President Joe Biden ran on the platform that U.S. citizens would not be required vaccinations, at least not forcibly, but he issued a mandate that would overturn his platform promise to initiate a mandate to all. A mandate that would not only force individuals into compliance, but if there was no compliance, the punishment would be the loss of your livelihood. In addition, he would create a civil wedge between those vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And let's not forget that social services would be denied if you didn't comply with the tyrant Joe Biden's edict. Was his mandate a means for public safety or just a means to permit Big Pharma to make a killing on selling their vaccines, which continues to rake in the profits? We need to file a Freedom of Information Act on who are the political players in cahoots with Big Pharma. Wouldn't that story be explosive to the public? But fortunately, states like Florida, under Governor DeSantis, are fighting back with great promise to prevent a vaccine mandate, which explains why New York police officers are moving to Florida to join their law enforcement department as a show of defiance and solidarity against New York's corrupt cronyism. Even today, with the jab and booster shots, are we any better off than we were at the beginning of the pandemic? Well, that will depend on who you ask, like the millions of people who've lost their jobs for not getting the jab, or the ones that got the jab and are contracting the coronavirus afterwards. In either case, the skepticism of the jab is growing each day, considering the vaccinated will continue the need for booster shots again and again. The narrative from the White House, the CDC, and Dr. Fauci is public safety, but the reality is public compliance. If you've given up your right of governing your health terms, what else would you be willing to give up for freedom? This is a narrative being voiced by popular patriot sites, Republican politicians, and even famous personalities. Next is a list by states and governors in defiance of the vaccine mandate. Arizona, Republican Governor Doug Ducey. Arkansas, the state, a bill prohibiting the state, political subdivisions of the state, or public officials from mandating vaccination as a condition of employment. Georgia, Republican Governor Brian Kemp. Florida, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. Indiana, Republican Governor Eric Holcomb. Montana, Republican Governor Greg Gianforte. New Mexico, Republican Governor Chris Sununu. North Dakota, Republican Governor Doug Burgum. Oklahoma, Republican Governor Kevin Stitt. Tennessee, Republican Governor Bill Lee. Texas, Governor Greg Abbott. Utah, Republican Governor Spencer Cox. Let's talk inflation. At first, you will hear numbers and percentages that won't sink in. However, bear with me, because with an information sharing podcast, my information can't be opinion-based. According to Trading Economics, the annual inflation rate in the U.S. likely accelerated to 6.8% in November of 2021, the highest since June of 1982, from 6.2% in October. It would be the 8th consecutive month the inflation stays above the Fed's 2% target as global commodities rally, rising demand, wage pressures, supply chain disruptions, and a low base effect from last year continue to push prices up. Fed Chair Powell recently noted that inflation may not recede in the second half of next year, and the central bank is expected to double the pace of taper next week. The Biden administration is also taking measures to tame inflation, including setting a supply chain task force to ease log jams and a release from petroleum reserves. Excluding volatile food and energy components, the inflation is expected to have accelerated to 4.9% from 4.6%, the highest since June of 1991. In short, folks, inflation will continue to rise, and you're going to feel it in your pocketbooks in the form of higher taxes, higher gas prices, higher grocery bills, and heating costs, in particular this winter. The culprits of this inflation are the Biden administration and the politicians voting to raise the debt ceiling. With the H.R. 3684, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and H.R. 5376, Build Back Better Act, which is out of control spending by the Democratic Party to make life easier on all of us. Has it been easier, folks? Do you notice that under the Democratic Party, when times are good, they raise taxes? And when times are like now, they raise taxes. And this will continue to be the burden you will bear unless you start holding the government and the politicians accountable for their nefarious increase in spending. Have you ever heard of a poor politician? Of course not, because their wages are made up of your tax dollars, and lobbyists who contribute to their coffers. Since when do lobbyists or special interest groups determine your means of making a living or how you live in a free society? Well, if you continue to turn a blind eye to what the Biden administration and the Democratic Party are doing, our democracy will be on its final journey into oblivion. Now, just to be clear, I have nothing against immigration into the United States as long as you follow the rule of law. However, I am against providing free anything to anyone who entered the country illegally, while those who have entered through the United States immigration policies have to take a back seat to those breaking the most basic of immigration laws, period. I will also add that I think it is criminal for the government to use our tax dollars to support such illegal activities that I have nothing to do with, while the homeless in the United States get nothing. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Although considered dead on arrival, H.R. 5376, Build Back Better Act itself is on life support until the Biden administration and the Democrats devise a way to convince other political holdouts like West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin and Representative Jared Golden, Democrat from Maine, who are the sole Democrats to vote against the Build Back Better bill. A scaled-down version has passed, though. Proposed was $550 billion for climate change, but now $320 billion would go to a decade of tax breaks for clean energy and electric vehicles. That includes investments in transmission to connect more communities to clean power across long distances and battery storage when there is no sun or wind. The framework also includes $105 billion to make communities more resilient to climate disasters and reduce pollution in low-income communities of color. Let's be reasonable here. How does this affect the average U.S. citizens? This money is going to businesses that clearly would lose money rather than just force high-polluting businesses to cease and desist. Next, funding for the framework covers free preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds, which will last for 6 years. Right now, a handful of states, including Vermont and Florida, offer some form of universal pre-K, but many do not. Ultimately, this measure would allocate federal money for implementing these programs through states that would have significant leeway in how to use it. Isn't that why we pay state and sales tax? So the government is going to pour money into this program for programs that could be funded by local and state taxes. But you see how the money is spent becomes discretionary. Keyword, folks, at the discretion of the state. The health section of the Scaled Back Build Back Better Act primarily focuses on improving the Affordable Care Act. You remember the bill in which you had to dish out money to pay for those individuals who didn't want to work or illegal immigrants. So how do you propose that will make life better for you? Up until a few months ago, I was working for an organization that would pay half the cost of my medical benefits, leaving close to $600 a month left to me to pay for. So we're talking about $1,200. But under this program, if you don't want to work or you're an illegal alien, you don't pay for anything. In any case, so why is it that the undocumented or the illegal aliens get better health services than me or many of you out there? Is this bill going to offset the cost of health care for me? I doubt it. It will be used to pay for illegal immigrants to ensure they will vote as Democrats. The framework announced on Thursday would extend private insurance subsidies to more middle-class people who purchase coverage individually through the law and expand the subsidies for people who already receive them. The bill would also make people left uninsured because their state has refused the ACA's medical expansion eligible for cost-free private insurance on the law's marketplace. Those new subsidies would expire after 2025. Folks, nothing in the government's proposal is free to anyone. Prove me wrong. Democrats have tried to use budget reconciliation to approve a pathway to citizenship for DACA recipients at the cost to taxpayers of $100 billion for frontline workers and temporary protected visa holders. The Senate parliamentarian who governs what policy can and can't be made via reconciliation has ruled against it. However, how many undocumented and illegal immigrants have been frontline workers? Unless the government is referring to field workers, day workers, and low-paid people that get paid pennies on the dollar. The problem here is the target group. Temporary protected visa holders can be over 7 million undocumented that enter the U.S. illegally. The parliamentarian could rule against additional immigration provisions as well, which is why the $100 billion is marked as tentative funding to be added on top of Biden's $1.75 trillion frameworks. Democrats intend to pitch other alternatives, including reforms that address the illegal immigration visa backlog, the New York Times reports. XL Keystone pipeline canceled. Southern border crisis. Afghanistan withdrawal. Vaccine mandates. Inflation. Infrastructure Spending and Jobs Act. Build Back Better plan. Weaponizing the IRS. Why is President Joe Biden's approval rating so low? All the above. Plain and simple. In his entire career, Joe Biden has been asleep behind the wheel and needs to be put out to pasture. He is an embarrassment to this nation and doesn't have a clue how average Americans are suffering under his so-called leadership. My conclusion is President Joe Biden is the disaster that was either voted into office or employing election interference stole the election. I don't know which is true or false because there have been so many reports about the election machines being tampered with or the cover-ups during the vote tally, which leaves me wanting to find out more. And the idea of election fraud is very tantalizing. And the reaction of the Democratic Party on any insinuation of election fraud is met with terms like conspiracy theory, sore losers, MAGA supporters, insurrectionists, and many other terms not worth mentioning. Be that as it may, President Joe Biden is our president for better or for worse. Unfortunately, worse is what we are experiencing. For those of you with buyer's remorse after voting for this fossil for president, I told you so. And those of you that continue to sip out of the Kool-Aid fountain, it is safe to say that his disasters will eventually hurt you or someone close to you until you wake up. It's like that old saying about the frog in a boiling pot. You don't cook it right away because the frog will jump out of the pot. You simply turn up the heat gradually until the frog is boiled alive. It's either that or you're plain ignorant to what has been unveiling for the last few months under his administration. If you don't see how the Biden administration and the rest of the Democratic Party have been running wild and out of control with their socialistic and tyrannical methods of governing us, you have been indoctrinated and you are a slave of a false reality. My friends on the other side, you're trapped in the Matrix. And unfortunately, there is no Neo to save the day. Your hero or heroes are staring at you in the mirror. I say that because you have the God-given right to dissent, voice your opinion, hold people accountable. But maybe that numbing effect of being put on your knees has deteriorated your will to do the right thing. Maybe you're afraid of what others will think, or you're concerned of being canceled. Guess what? You have been canceled, and people are already thinking the worst about you if you have become complacent, unpatriotic, and uninvolved with the issues we face as a nation. Some will find it funny that I mention being a patriot as though this only existed in the colonial days. No, my friends, being a patriot is not an outdated fad. It is a movement of people like me and you waging a war against the end of democracy. My friends, become critical thinkers. Take responsibility for the protection and the custodialship of the Constitution. Speak out for freedom. We still need principled public servants of Americans for Americans. Prove me wrong. God bless and good night. Wake up, America. Wake up.